In the heart of Texas hill country, a woman they once called Deadeye is about to remind three escaped killers why she earned that name. Laura Carter isn't just a farmer's wife. She's the most lethal, competitive shooter in American history, with a record that even military snipers couldn't touch. 10 years ago, she walked away from fame and glory to live a quiet life, leaving behind a legacy of impossible shots and shattered records. But when three desperate convicts take her farm as a hideout, they have no idea they've just trapped themselves with the deadliest sharpshooter the world has ever seen. What follows is the story of how a single woman turned a hostage situation into a hunting ground, reminding everyone why some legends are better left alone. In the next 12 hours, these escaped convicts will learn that they're not the predators in this situation. They're the prey. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn painted the Texas hill country in shades of amber and gold as Laura Carter walked the fence line of her small farm. Her boots crunched on frost-covered grass, the late autumn air crisp and clean. At 43, she moved with the fluid grace of someone half her age, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon, old habits that never quite died. The farm wasn't much by Texas standards. 30 acres of workable land, a modest two-story house that needed a fresh coat of paint, and a barn that her husband Tom had converted into a workshop. But it was everything she'd wanted when she walked away from the competitive shooting circuit 10 years ago. "Found another break in the fence," Tom called out, his weathered pickup rolling to a stop beside her. He was already dressed for his job at the local hardware store, thermos of coffee in hand. "Probably those Wilson boys' cattle again," Laura smiled, reaching for the toolbox in his truck bed. "I'll fix it. You're running late as it is." Tom's eyes crinkled with concern. "You sure? With those reports about the prison break?" "Huntsville's 100 miles away," Laura replied, though she'd spent the morning listening to news reports about 3 escaped convicts. "Besides, I've got plenty to keep me busy. Mrs. Rodriguez is bringing her kids by later for riding lessons." Tom nodded, but his hand lingered on the truck door. They both knew Laura could handle herself. He'd married her at the height of her competitive career, had watched her set records that still stood unbroken. But he also understood why she'd chosen this quiet life, why she'd walked away from the spotlight after that final championship. "Just keep your phone close," he said finally. "Sheriff Matthews said they've got roadblocks up, but these guys are desperate. Already hit 2 gas stations on their way south." Laura leaned in through the truck window, kissing him softly. "Go on, you'll be late. I've got chores to finish before the lessons anyway." She watched him drive away, waiting until his truck disappeared around the bend before reaching into her boot. The compact .22 pistol was small but meticulously maintained. She never carried it when students were around. That wasn't part of her new life. But with escaped convicts in the area, it paid to be careful. The morning passed in a rhythm of familiar tasks. Laura fixed the fence, fed the horses, and checked on the young mare they were training for the neighbor's ranch. Each movement was precise, economical, the same efficiency that had once made her famous on the competition circuit now applied to farm work. In the barn shadow, 6 glass bottles stood arranged on an old fence post. Laura had placed them there weeks ago, telling Tom they were for recycling. She glanced at them now, measuring distances automatically. 30 yards to the first, 45 to the last. Wind from the southeast, about 5 miles per hour. The calculations came unbidden. Muscle memory that no amount of time could erase. Her phone buzzed, a text from Carol Rodriguez canceling the riding lessons. The prison break had everyone nervous, parents keeping their kids close to home. Laura sent back a reassuring reply, understanding their caution. But as she tucked the phone away, her hand brushed the pistol in her boot, and memories of another life flickered through her mind. The last competition, The final round, 5 targets at impossible angles, with crosswinds that had defeated every other shooter. The crowd's roar when she'd made the shots that would become legend in shooting circles. And then, the quiet decision to walk away, to choose peace over glory. Laura shook off the memories and headed toward the house. The morning news had shown grainy security footage of the escaped convicts. Marcus Reed, serving life for multiple murders. James Cooper, armed robbery and attempted murder. And their leader Victor Kane, a former military marksman whose kill count had never been fully determined. She'd watched the footage carefully, noting their movements, their way of carrying themselves. Kane especially, the way he handled the gun during the gas station robbery showed his training. These weren't ordinary criminals. They were experienced, desperate, and heading south. Inside the house, Laura put on coffee and checked the news again. No new sightings since early morning. The roadblocks were pushing them east, away from the major highways, away from populated areas, toward places like her farm. Her hand moved unconsciously to the cabinet above the refrigerator, where a false panel concealed her old competition pistol. She hadn't touched it in years, hadn't needed to. The life she'd built here with Tom was everything she'd wanted. Quiet, peaceful, far from the pressure and attention of her former career. But as she watched another news update about the escaped convicts, Laura felt old instinct stirring. The same focus that had made her the most celebrated competitive shooter in history hummed quietly in the back of her mind, reading angles and distances, noting cover and concealment, planning for contingencies she hoped she'd never need. The woman they'd called Deadeye might have retired, might have chosen a simpler life, but she hadn't forgotten. And if trouble found its way to her farm, it would discover that some skills never fade. Some legends never quite lose their edge. Laura glanced at the clock. Almost noon. Tom would be calling soon for their daily check-in, a habit born of small-town life and genuine affection. She'd tell him about the cancelled lessons, about the fence repair, about the ordinary details of their quiet life. But she wouldn't mention the pistol in her boot, or the way she'd unconsciously begun mapping firing positions across their property. Some preparations were better kept private, some skills better left unspoken. After all, the most dangerous predators were often the ones that appeared harmless. The afternoon sun beat down on Laura's back as she worked in the garden, her movements deliberate and focused. To anyone passing by, she looked like any other farmer's wife tending her vegetables. They wouldn't notice how she'd positioned herself, with clear sight lines to both the main road and the back trail that led through the hills. Her phone rang, Tom's daily check-in. "Everything quiet?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Sheriff just stopped by the store. They found the convict's stolen car abandoned about 40 miles east of here." Laura's hands stilled in the soil. 40 miles east. Getting closer. "Everything's fine here," she assured him. "Just working in the garden, thinking about driving into town for supplies later." "Maybe wait until tomorrow," Tom suggested. "I can pick up anything we need on my way home." A flicker of movement caught Laura's eye, just a deer emerging from the tree line, but her focus sharpened automatically. "Actually, you're right. I've got plenty to do here anyway. The barn roof still needs patching." After hanging up, Laura stood slowly, stretching her back. The barn roof was just an excuse, but it gave her a reason to get up high, to see what else might be moving through the surrounding hills. The old Laura would have already been up there, rifle ready. The new Laura had to remind herself to move casually, to maintain the appearance of routine. The ladder to the barn roof creaked under her weight. From this height, she could see for miles across the rolling Texas landscape. The main highway was a distant ribbon, heat waves distorting the occasional glint of passing cars. Closer in, she noted changes in the landscape. Branches disturbed in an unusual pattern near the creek, fresh tire tracks on the seldom-used back road. Someone had passed through recently, trying to stay hidden. Laura descended the ladder with practiced efficiency, her mind calculating. The discarded car 40 miles east, the tracks leading this way, the disturbed branches. A pattern was emerging, one that made her stomach tighten with familiar anticipation. Inside the house, she moved through each room with purpose. The shotgun. Above the fireplace was purely decorative. Tom's father's old hunting piece unloaded, but behind the hall closet's false-back panel, her competition guns remained meticulously maintained. She hadn't touched them in years, hadn't needed to. Now her fingers traced their outlines, muscle memory stirring. The afternoon wore on. Laura continued her normal routine, but with subtle adjustments. The horses were moved to the back pasture, away from potential trouble. Key equipment was shifted to provide better cover. Each movement served double duty, maintaining the appearance of ordinary farm work while preparing for possibilities she hoped wouldn't materialize. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Carol Rodriguez. "Police just came by. They're telling everyone to lock their doors. You okay out there alone?" Laura typed back a reassuring response, even as she noted another change in the landscape. The birds near the creek had gone quiet. Something, or someone, was disturbing their normal patterns. She glanced at the clock. Tom wouldn't be home for hours yet. Part of her wanted to call him, to warn him about the signs she was reading in the land and wildlife. But what would she say? That her old instincts were humming? That she could feel trouble approaching like an oncoming storm? Instead, she walked to the kitchen window, positioning herself to appear casual while maintaining clear sightlines to the approach roads. The pistol in her boot was a comfortable weight, a connection to skills she'd chosen to set aside, but never truly lost. The woman they'd called Deadeye hadn't just been a competition shooter. She'd been a student of human nature, of movement and intention, of the 1,000 tiny details that could mean the difference between victory and defeat. Those lessons had served her well in competition. Now, as shadows lengthened across her farm, she felt them stirring back to life. A crow called out in alarm from the direction of the creek. Laura's hands stilled on the dish she was drying, her attention sharpening. 3 more crows joined the first, their pattern of movement indicating they were being disturbed by something moving steadily closer. Someone was coming, and they were trying very hard not to be seen. The emergency broadcast alert cut through the afternoon quiet, interrupting the local radio station. Laura kept on for background noise. The announcer's voice was tight with controlled urgency. "Authorities have confirmed that the 3 escaped. Convicts from Huntsville State Penitentiary are believed to be in Hill County. Citizens are advised to stay indoors and report any suspicious activity immediately." Laura's hands tightened on the dish towel as she listened to the description of recent sightings. The convicts had been spotted at a farm supply store 20 miles away, stealing provisions and a truck. The stolen vehicle's description matched the tracks she'd seen on the back road. Her phone rang. Tom again. "Laura, I'm coming home early. Sheriff Matthews just put out an alert. I heard," she cut in, keeping her voice calm. "But don't leave work yet. If they're in the area, I don't want you driving these back roads alone." "You shouldn't be out there alone either," Tom insisted. "Maybe you could go to Carol's place in town." A distant engine sound caught Laura's attention. Not from the main road, from the back trail that wound through the hills. "Tom, I need to go. Getting another call." She hung up before he could protest, moving swiftly to the window. The engine sound had cut off. Laura's mind calculated distances, angles, approaches. The back trail led to an old cattle gate 1/2 mile from the house. Perfect place to hide a vehicle. Perfect place to approach on foot if you didn't want to be seen. She moved through the house with practiced efficiency. No movement wasted. The competition pistol came out of its hiding place, checked and loaded with the same precision that had won her championships. Extra magazines went into her pockets, concealed by her work shirt. The radio crackled again. "Update on the escaped. Convicts. The stolen truck has been located abandoned near the Old Mill Road area. Residents are warned that these men are considered extremely dangerous. Old Mill Road, less than a mile from her farm. No coincidence. Laura's phone buzzed with text messages, concerned neighbors, the sheriff's office alert system, Tom trying to call again. She silenced the phone. Background noise wouldn't help her now. Moving to the front window, she maintained the appearance of normal activity, adjusting curtains while scanning the tree line. The birds had gone completely quiet now. The horses in the back pasture were clustered together, heads up, sensing the tension in the air. 10 years of peaceful farm life had given Laura deep knowledge of her land. Every approach, every hiding spot, every natural advantage. The convicts might have military training, might be desperate and dangerous, but they didn't know this terrain, not like she did. A metallic glint from the tree line caught her eye. Afternoon sun reflecting off something that shouldn't be there. Laura's fingers traced the grip of her pistol, muscle memory flooding back. Distance, approximately 200 yards. Wind, minimal. Multiple potential firing positions identified automatically, categorized by cover and angle. The radio's final. Warning was almost lost in static. Residents are advised to lock all doors and windows. Do not attempt to engage if... Laura switched it off. Her preparations were complete, subtle enough to be invisible to approaching threats, thorough enough to give her every advantage. Now she just had to maintain her cover as an ordinary farmer's wife, at least until she knew exactly what she was dealing with. The sound of footsteps on gravel reached her ears, multiple sets, trying to move quietly and not quite succeeding. They were coming up the main drive, probably thinking the front approach would seem less suspicious. Laura took a deep breath, letting the familiar calm of competition settle over her. Everything was positioned exactly as she needed it, every angle calculated, every fallback point prepared, all while maintaining the appearance of an ordinary farmhouse, an ordinary target. They were about to learn just how deceiving appearances could be. The knock at the front door was almost polite. Laura watched through the kitchen window as 3 men stood on her porch, their postures carefully casual despite the tension in their shoulders. The leader, she recognized Victor Kane from the news reports, wore a stolen plaid shirt and work boots, trying to look like a local. The other 2 hadn't bothered. Their prison-issued white shirts were still visible under borrowed jackets. "Hello?" Kane called out, his voice friendly. "Anyone? Our truck broke down up the road, hoping to use a phone." Laura's mind catalogued details automatically. Kane, right-handed, military stance, despite his attempt to appear relaxed. The larger man, Marcus Reed, favoring his left side, possible injury during the escape. The third, James Cooper. Nervous energy, hand constantly straying toward his waistband. All armed, poorly concealing pistols under their jackets. The sound of Tom's truck engine approaching made Laura's heart skip. He'd left work early despite her warning. The convicts heard it too, their postures shifting subtly from deception to predatory readiness. Laura opened the door, projecting the perfect image of a naive farmer's wife. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Kane smiled, but his eyes were already tracking the approaching truck. "Sorry to bother you, ma'am. Our vehicle broke down, and we could really use a phone." Of course, Laura gestured them inside, mind racing. Keep them focused on her, away from Tom. "Phone's in the kitchen. Would you like some water? Looks like..." "You've been walking a while." Reed and Cooper exchanged glances, clearly surprised by how easily they'd gained entry. Kane's smile widened, though his eyes remained cold. "That's mighty kind of you, ma'am." Tom's truck pulled up outside. Laura saw the exact moment he recognized the situation, saw the mud-covered clothes, the poorly concealed weapons, the way. Kane's hand was already moving toward his pistol. "Laura!" Tom called out, his voice steady, despite the fear she heard underneath. "Everything okay?" "Oh, these gentlemen just need to use our phone," Laura replied. her tone carefully light. Their truck broke down. Nobody's using any phone. Kane's friendly facade dropped as he drew his weapon. Both of you, inside. Now. Tom moved slowly, hands raised. His eyes met Laura's, seeking confirmation. She gave him the slightest nod. Not yet. Let them think they're in control. In the living room, Kane directed, gesturing with his pistol. Nice and easy. Reed was already moving through the house, checking rooms with practiced efficiency. Cooper stayed by the door, nervous energy making him shift constantly. Hands where we can see them, Kane ordered as they reached the living room. Mrs. Carter, Laura supplied, watching Reed return from his search. Laura Carter. Mrs. Carter. Kane's smile returned, colder now. I apologize for the deception, but we'll be needing your hospitality for a few hours, just until things quiet down. Cooperate. And no one needs to get hurt. Tom started to speak, but Laura squeezed his hand in warning. She needed them overconfident, needed them to see exactly what they expected to see. A helpless couple. Easy targets. The house is clear, Reed reported. But there's a barn and some outbuildings. Check them, Kane ordered. Cooper, watch the road. Our hosts are going to help us lay low for a bit. That's when Tom made his move. Laura saw it coming but couldn't stop him, the protective instinct overriding caution. He lunged for Kane, trying to knock the gun away. The fight was brief and brutal. Kane sidestepped, bringing his pistol down hard. Tom crumpled, blood flowing from a gash above his eye. Tom! Laura's cry of dismay wasn't entirely acting. She started toward him, but Kane's gun stopped her. He'll live, Kane said coldly. But that's the only free lesson you get. Next time, someone dies. Understand? Laura nodded, kneeling beside Tom's unconscious form. Her fingers found his pulse, strong and steady. The head wound looked worse than it was, but he'd be out for a while. Tie them up, Kane ordered, as Reed returned from checking the outbuildings. Then we'll get properly settled in. Looks like we found ourselves a nice, quiet place to wait out the manhunt. As Reed bound her hands with zip ties, Laura kept her expression frightened, compliant. Let them think they'd found easy prey. Let them believe they were in control. They hadn't even bothered to check her boots. The afternoon sun slanted through the living room windows as Kane paced the length of the room, checking sight lines and examining photos on the walls. He paused at a dusty trophy shelf, barely giving the shooting awards a glance. They were old, unremarkable in a state where everyone grew up handling firearms. Quite a setup you've got here, Kane remarked, turning back to Laura. She sat in the armchair where they'd placed her, hands bound in front of her, the picture of defeated compliance. Tom lay unconscious on the couch, Reed watching over him. With obvious boredom, remote but not too remote, good views of the approach roads, almost perfect for our needs. How long? Laura asked, letting her voice tremble slightly. How long are you planning to stay? Kane smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Worried about your husband, Mrs. Carter? He'll be fine as long as everyone behaves. We just need somewhere quiet to wait out the search. 24 hours, maybe less. Cooper burst in from his watch position at the front door. Vehicle approaching. Looks like a police cruiser. Kane's reaction was instant. Reed, get her up. Mrs. Carter is going to help us maintain our cover. One wrong word, one wrong look, and your husband bleeds. Understood? Laura nodded frantically, playing her role. As Reed roughly pulled her to her feet, she stumbled slightly, using the movement to test the zip ties. They'd bound her hands in front, an amateur mistake. More importantly, they hadn't searched her. The small .22 still pressed reassuringly against her ankle. The police cruiser rolled slowly past the house, Deputy Wilson at the wheel. Laura stood at the window, Reed's gun pressed against her back, and waved normally. The deputy waved back, continuing his patrol. He couldn't see Reed behind her, couldn't know anything was wrong. Perfect, Kane said as the cruiser disappeared around the bend. See how easy that was? Cooperation keeps everyone alive. He turned to Cooper. Check the kitchen, see what we've got for supplies. We'll need to lay low until dark. Laura watched Cooper disappear into the kitchen, cataloguing everything. 3 targets separated. Kane's military background showed in how he constantly checked angles, maintained awareness. Reed was physically powerful but lazy, already settling back to watch Tom. Cooper was the weak link, nervous, unpredictable. "You've done this before," Laura observed quietly, keeping her voice meek. "Taken hostages, I mean." Kane studied her with new interest. "Trying to figure us out, Mrs. Carter. Good instinct, but not helpful in your situation. Though I am curious, most people in your position would be hysterical by now. You seem unusually calm." Laura let tears well up in her eyes. "I'm just trying to keep my husband alive. Please, he needs medical attention." "He needs to stay quiet," Reed growled, "or I'll give him something real to worry about." A groan from Tom drew their attention. He was starting to stir, blood dried on his face. Laura moved toward him, but Kane's hand shot out, gripping her arm. Ah, he warned. "Reed will handle it. You're going to give us a tour of the property. I want to know every building, every approach, every possible hiding spot. Consider it a security consultation." As Kane led her outside, Laura noted the sun's position, the wind direction, the placement of shadows. Everything she'd once used to calculate impossible shots was now being repurposed for a different kind of competition. One where the targets weren't steel plates, and the stakes were life and death. They had no idea they'd just given their hostage exactly what she needed, a chance to survey the battlefield. The property tour was exactly what Laura needed. Kane walked beside her, his gun hidden but ready, as she pointed out the buildings and fence lines. Every hesitation in her voice was calculated, every nervous gesture designed to reinforce their underestimation of her. "The barn's mostly storage now," she explained, leading Kane through the wide doors. "Farm equipment, feed, some of Tom's old hunting gear." Her eyes flickered deliberately to the locked cabinet in the corner, a move Kane caught instantly. "Cooper," he called, "check that cabinet." The nervous man rushed to comply, breaking the lock with a crowbar. Inside, exactly as Laura had planned, they found Tom's old hunting rifles. Basic models, nothing special. And more importantly, nothing that hinted at her competition weapons, still hidden in the house. "Your husband hunts?" Kane asked, examining the rifles with professional interest. "Used to," Laura replied. "Not so much anymore, bad knee." Kane nodded, seemingly satisfied. The guns were exactly what he expected to find on a Texas farm. No reason to look deeper, to search harder. Laura watched him direct Cooper to gather the weapons, noting how the younger man handled them awkwardly. Not a shooter, despite his bravado. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Laura glanced at the approaching clouds, letting worry show on her face. "Storm's coming. The back road floods sometimes, if you're planning to leave that way." "Worried about our escape route, Mrs. Carter?" Kane's voice carried a warning edge. "No, I don't want you to get trapped here. The longer you stay—" She let the sentence trail off, planting the seed of urgency in their minds. Reed appeared at the barn door. "Tom's awake, getting restless." "Let's continue this tour inside," Kane decided. "I want everyone where I can see them." Back in the house, Tom sat on the couch, his face pale, but his eyes alert. Laura read the question in his expression and gave an imperceptible shake of her head. "Not yet." "Hungry?" she asked the room at large. Careful to sound appropriately intimidated. "I could fix something. Might help clear Tom's head." Kane considered this. "Cooper, go with her. Watch her hands." The kitchen became a study in calculated movements. Laura let her hands shake slightly as she prepared sandwiches, playing to Cooper's expectations, but each motion served multiple purposes, noting which drawers made noise, which floorboards creaked, how the setting sun cast shadows through the windows. "Don't try anything," Cooper warned, fidgeting with his gun. I'm not as nice as Kane. No, Laura agreed quietly, reading. His insecurity. You're smarter. You can see how dangerous this situation is. Cooper blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected compliment. Just make the food. In the living room, she could hear Kane questioning Tom about the farm's layout, comparing answers to what she'd told him. Their stories matched. They'd planned for situations like this, though never expecting to actually need the preparations. The storm drew closer, thunder growing louder. Laura counted seconds between lightning and sound, calculating distance automatically. The approaching front would bring wind from the southeast, information that could be crucial later. Food's ready, she announced, carrying the plates out. She'd arranged the sandwiches carefully, better ones for Kane and Reed, playing to their egos, a slightly smaller portion for Cooper, feeding his sense of grievance. Sit down, Kane ordered after she'd distributed the food. Mrs. Carter, you seem to be adjusting to your situation. That's good. Smart. Keep making smart choices, and this ends well for everyone. Laura sat beside Tom, feeling the reassuring weight of the .22 still hidden in her boot. Let them think she was adjusting, accepting. Let them grow comfortable with their apparent control. The storm would hit within the hour. Darkness was coming, and with it, opportunities that only someone with her particular skills would recognize. Tell me about the roads again, Kane said between bites. Every possible way in and out, Laura began explaining, her voice carefully, hesitant, watching Cooper's attention wander, noting Reed's growing boredom. Only Kane maintained his professional focus, but even he was starting to relax slightly. Perfect. Everything was proceeding exactly as she needed it to. The storm hit with surprising force, rain drumming against the farmhouse windows as darkness fell. Laura had positioned herself carefully when Kane ordered them all into the living room. Angle to the kitchen door, clear view of the hallway, exact distance to each potential cover point mentally marked. Signal's dead, Cooper announced, frantically working his stolen phone. Can't get updates on the police search. Storms do that out here, Laura offered quietly. Cell towers aren't reliable when it's bad. That's why we keep a landline. Kane's eyes narrowed. Where? Kitchen wall, but it probably won't work either. Power usually goes out in storms like this. As if on cue, lightning cracked overhead, and the house lights flickered ominously. Check it, Kane ordered Reed, who lumbered. Toward the kitchen, Laura counted his steps, timing them against the thunder. The storm was directly overhead now, creating a natural cover of ambient noise. Tom shifted beside her on the couch, his head wound cleaned, but his eyes still slightly unfocused. She'd insisted on treating it, using the opportunity to whisper crucial information while pretending to soothe him. Now he sat quietly, playing his role perfectly, injured, helpless, but aware enough to follow her lead. Landline's dead too, Reed reported, returning. We're cut off. Don't like this. Cooper paced nervously. We should have kept moving, sitting ducks here if they find us. Nobody's finding anything in this weather, Kane replied, but Laura noted the tension in his stance. He moved to the window, checking the darkness beyond. We waited out, maintained position until the lights went out. Total darkness filled the house, broken only by lightning flashes. Laura felt the men's sudden tension, heard Cooper's sharp intake of breath. In the brief illumination from the storm, she saw Kane reaching for his flashlight. Nobody move, Kane ordered. Cooper, get the lights from the bag. Reed, watch them. I can't see anything. Cooper's voice carried barely. Controlled panic. There are candles in the kitchen drawer, Laura offered. By the sink and a flashlight in the hall closet. I can... You stay put. Kane cut her off. Cooper, find that flashlight. Reed, if either of them moves, shoot. Laura sat perfectly still, using the darkness to her advantage. Every time lightning flashed, she memorized positions, angles, distances. The storm had given her exactly what she needed: confusion, cover noise, and most importantly, fear. These men were killers, hardened criminals, but darkness and isolation affected everyone. Cooper's searching created predictable noise, letting her track his movement. The hall closet door creaked. Third hinge needed oil, something she'd never gotten around to fixing. Now that small imperfection worked in her favor, telling her exactly where he was. Found it! Cooper's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, swinging wild patterns across the walls. The erratic light was actually worse than darkness, destroying night vision while creating disorienting shadows. Another flash of lightning, another crash of thunder. In that instant, Laura saw what she needed. Kane had moved away from Tom, positioning himself to cover the room's entrance. Reed was too focused on Cooper's light show, his guard positions sloppy. The power vacuum was affecting them. Without communications, without visibility, their professional facade was cracking. Cooper's nervousness had become almost manic. Reed's boredom had shifted to agitation, and even Kane's calm control showed signs of strain. "We need to think about moving," Cooper insisted, his flashlight beam jerking with his agitation. "The road could flood. We could be trapped here." "We're not going anywhere in this," Kane snapped. "Maintain position, watch the windows. This changes nothing." But it had changed everything. The storm had isolated them, stripped away their technological advantages, reduced them to basic survival instincts. Laura knew from experience how darkness affected people, how it amplified fears, distorted distances, made every shadow a potential threat. More importantly, she knew this house. Every creaking board, every trick of acoustics, every way the old farmhouse played with sound and shadow. In competition, she'd learned to use environmental conditions to her advantage. Now those same skills would serve a deadlier purpose. "The generator," she said suddenly, letting worry fill her voice. "In the barn. If the power's out too long, the freezer will thaw. All our meat—" "Quiet," Kane ordered, but she saw him processing the information. A generator meant power, communications, control restored. Exactly what they needed, and exactly what she wanted them to think about. Tom caught her meaning instantly. "She's right," he added, his voice weak but concerned. "Couple $100 of meat in there. Plus the generator's got a radio." The prospect of regaining communications made Kane pause. Laura watched his tactical mind working, weighing risks against rewards. The barn was only 50 yards away, but in this weather, those yards might as well be miles. "Reed," Kane decided. "Take Cooper, check the generator. 5 minutes. Any trouble? Signal with the flashlight?" Perfect. They were separating exactly as she'd hoped. The storm had given her confusion and cover. Now it would give her isolation. One group at a time, divide and conquer, as Reed and Cooper prepared. To brave the storm, Laura kept her expression carefully worried. Let them think she was concerned about frozen meat. Let them believe their hostage was still playing their game. They'd never suspect she was actually playing her own. A game where every move, every seemingly innocent suggestion, was another piece carefully positioned for the killing shots too. "Come!" Thunder crashed overhead, drowning out the sound of the back door opening. In the darkness, Laura allowed herself the smallest smile. The hunt was about to begin. Reed and Cooper had been gone for 10 minutes. 5 longer than Kane's order. The storm's intensity made it impossible to see the barn from the house. The darkness broken only by periodic lightning flashes. Each time thunder crashed, Laura noted how Kane's attention shifted slightly, tracking sounds that could be footsteps, movement, or just the storm's fury. "Something's wrong," Kane muttered, moving to the window. "They should have signaled by." "Now," Laura watched him carefully, noting the subtle change in his stance. Professional calm was giving way to instinctive tension. Good. The first seeds of doubt were taking root. A sharp crack from outside. branch or lightning strike, impossible to tell which. Kane spun toward the sound, weapon raised. In that instant, Laura saw something in his eyes. Recognition. The slow dawn of realization that something about this situation wasn't what it seemed. "The trophies," he said suddenly, turning back to face her. "I saw them earlier but didn't really look. Shooting trophies, competition dates." Laura kept her expression neutral, maintaining her role even as she saw the pieces coming together in Kane's tactical mind. "Local stuff," she said dismissively. "Town competitions, nothing serious." Lightning illuminated the room. Kane moved to the trophy shelf, reading more carefully now. His body language changed, subtle shifts in posture, grip tightening on his weapon. The predator sensing he might be prey. "Laura Carter," he read aloud. "National champion, 4 consecutive years. Perfect score at—" His voice trailed off as he found the newspaper clipping tucked behind the trophies. "Deadeye, Carter sets unbreakable record." The power dynamic in the room shifted palpably. Kane turned slowly, really seeing her for the first time. Not a farmer's wife playing hostage, but something far more dangerous. "The Richardson competition," he said quietly. 2012. That was you. The 5-target sequence that nobody thought was possible. Laura allowed herself a small smile, dropping the frightened hostage act. No point maintaining it now. 700 yards, crosswind at 20 knots, 5 targets, 5 seconds, 5. Perfect hits. They retired the course after that. Said it couldn't be done again. Kane's professional demeanor cracked slightly. He'd served in the military, understood exactly what that kind of shooting meant. "That's why you've been so calm. Why you've been watching angles, noting positions." His eyes narrowed. "Where are your real guns, Laura?" Before she could answer, the back door burst open. Cooper stumbled in, drenched and wild-eyed. "Reed's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" Kane demanded. "We got to the barn checking the generator. I turned around and he just wasn't there anymore." Cooper's voice cracked with panic. "I heard something like a whisper, but with the storm." Laura watched Kane's face as he processed this development. She could practically see him reassessing every moment since they'd arrived, every casual suggestion she'd made, every position she'd taken. "The generator suggestion," he said slowly. "You wanted us to split up. Figured the storm would give." "Good cover," Laura replied calmly. "Sound, darkness, confusion, basic tactical advantage." Cooper looked between them, uncomprehending. "What's going on? What's she talking about?" "She's talking about how she's been playing us since we arrived." Kane's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Where's Reed?" Laura shrugged. "Zip-tied. In the barn loft. Don't worry, I was careful. Professional courtesy, one shooter to another. Though his form was sloppy. Too much military reliance on firepower over precision." Cooper raised his gun, hands shaking. "I'll kill you!" "Cooper!" Kane's sharp command froze him. "Think. She's not just some farmer's wife. She's Deadeye, Carter. If she wanted us dead, we'd be dead already." He studied Laura with new respect. "And wariness. This whole thing, the power outage, the generator, the storm. You've been herding us exactly where you want us." "It's what I do," Laura confirmed. "Read conditions, calculate angles, control the environment. Only difference is, my targets usually don't move." Thunder crashed again. And in that instant of natural cover, Laura saw Kane make his decision. His gun started to raise, not in threat, but preparing to fire. He'd figured it out too late. Kane's trigger finger never completed its motion. The house plunged into total darkness as lightning struck somewhere close, the thunderclap immediate and deafening. In that moment of sensory overload, Laura moved. Tom, who'd been playing barely, conscious, kicked the coffee table hard. The crash covered Laura's roll behind the couch, the motion so fluid it seemed choreographed. By the time Cooper's flashlight beam found her previous position, she was gone. "Where is she?" Cooper's voice cracked with panic. His light beam jerked wildly around the room, creating more shadows than illumination. "Shut up," Kane commanded, his military training taking over. "And get your light under control. You're destroying our night vision." His own weapon tracked smoothly through the darkness, professional discipline evident in every movement. "Laura, this doesn't have to end badly." "You're right." Her voice came from somewhere in the darkness, the old farmhouse's acoustics making it impossible to pinpoint. "That's why Reed's still breathing. Last chance to surrender." A massive gust of wind rattled the windows. The storm was intensifying, as if nature itself was responding to the tension inside the house. Cooper's breathing had become ragged, his fear palpable in the darkness. "You don't understand," Kane called out, trying to regain control of the situation. "We can't go back. There's nothing waiting for us except life sentences." "Then you should have picked a different house." Laura's voice seemed to come from a different direction now. "Different hostages." Thunder crashed again, in the brief lightning. Illumination. Kane caught a glimpse of movement near the kitchen door. His shot was fast, professional, and hit nothing but wall. "You're good," Laura acknowledged, her voice calm despite the bullet hole inches from where she'd been. "Military, training shows, but you're used to having backup night vision, tactical advantages. Here, in my house, you got none of that," Cooper snapped. He began firing wildly into the darkness, his shots deafeningly loud in the confined space. Come out, or I'll kill your husband." "Cooper." Kane's shout came too late. The muzzle, flashes, had ruined what remained of their night vision and revealed their exact positions to Laura. Worse, Cooper's threat had eliminated any chance of a peaceful resolution. From somewhere in the darkness, Laura's voice carried an edge of cold. "Steel. That was a mistake." The wind outside reached hurricane force, rain pounding against the windows like bullets. Cooper's flashlight beam caught movement. Just a curtain blown by a draft, but he fired anyway. The beam illuminated empty air where Laura should have been. "She's playing with us," Kane realized aloud, "using the storm, the darkness, everything that should work against her, she's turning to her advantage." As if confirming his words, something metallic clinked across the floor. One of Laura's spent shell casings from the trophy shelf. Cooper's light followed the sound automatically. Fatal mistake. The next lightning flash revealed Laura standing directly behind him. Cooper never even had time to turn. Laura's strike was precise. Not lethal, but thoroughly incapacitating. He dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the floor. Kane's reaction was instantaneous, his weapon tracking the flash of movement. But Laura was already gone, melting, back into the darkness with fluid grace. The storm's fury covered any sound of her movement. "Two down," her voice came from somewhere to his left. Or was it right? The old house's acoustics played tricks, the wind and thunder creating a disorienting symphony of sound. "You were never trapped at all, were you?" Kane called out, slowly turning to cover the room. The zip ties, playing helpless. "It was all an act." "Had to assess the threat," Laura replied conversationally. "Understand what I was dealing with. You three weren't the first criminals to think this isolated farm would make an easy target. Another lightning flash, another glimpse of movement. Kane's shot was perfect and hit another empty space where Laura had been a split second before. The difference is," her voice continued, now seemingly from behind him, "most of them figure out their mistake a lot sooner." The storm reached a crescendo outside, wind howling through every crack in the old farmhouse. Somewhere in the darkness, Laura Carter, the woman they'd thought was just another helpless hostage, was hunting them, and she was just getting started. The Richardson competition. Final round. Laura remembered it like it was yesterday, not 13 years ago. 5 targets at impossible ranges, with crosswinds that had defeated every other shooter. The crowd had fallen silent as she stepped up to the line. Now, in the storm-dark house, Laura moved with the same focused precision. Kane was good. His military training showed in how he controlled his breathing, maintained his discipline, even as the situation deteriorated. But he was fighting blind, in unfamiliar territory, against an opponent he'd fatally underestimated. "You know what makes a perfect shot?" Laura's voice carried through the darkness. "It's not just accuracy, it's reading conditions, understanding how wind affects trajectory, how temperature changes performance." Another lightning flash. Kane fired at her voice, but she was already moving, the bullet embedded in the wall where she'd been a heartbeat before. "Take this storm, for example." Laura continued as if they were having a casual conversation. "Wind speed affects bullet drop, rain changes visibility, but if you know your environment..." The memory was crystal clear, her spotter calling out wind changes, her mind calculating adjustments automatically. 5 targets, 5 seconds. Most shooters would have been satisfied with hitting 3. Kane was moving now, trying to find better position. His footsteps were nearly silent, but Laura had spent 10 years learning every creaking board in this house. She could track his movement by sound alone. "The real secret," she said, her voice seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere, "is understanding that everything can be used to your advantage, even disadvantages." Lightning illuminated the room again. In that frozen instant, Kane saw Laura clearly and realized she was herding him exactly where she wanted him. Just like she'd used the storm to separate them, used the darkness to disorient them, used their own assumptions against them. "The Richardson course," Kane said, trying to keep her talking while he maneuvered. "That's where I first heard about you. 5 targets, 5 perfect hits. They said it was impossible. They were right." Laura's voice came from behind him. Kane spun, but hit only empty air. "It was impossible, by any normal standard of shooting, so I had to be better than normal." Another memory, her father's voice from childhood shooting lessons. "It's not about the target, Laura. It's about knowing yourself, being so sure of your capabilities that nothing else matters." Thunder crashed overhead. Kane used the sound to cover his movement, slipping toward what he thought was better cover. Laura smiled in the darkness. He was good, very good, but he was still thinking like a soldier, not a competitive shooter. "You walked away," Kane said, "at your peak. No one ever knew why." "I proved what I needed to prove." Laura moved silently. Through the shadows she knew by heart, found something better, peace, quiet, a normal life, until we showed up. "Until you threatened my husband, my home." Laura's voice hardened. "That's when you turned my normal life back into a competition. Only this time, the targets move." Lightning flashed again, and Kane realized his mistake. Too late. He'd backed himself into a corner, seeking cover that only existed from one angle. Laura had used his own tactical training against him, knowing he'd choose this position. In the competition, that final shot had seemed to stretch forever. Laura remembered the absolute clarity of that moment. Wind, range, elevation, all coming together in perfect alignment. Now, in the storm-dark house, she felt that same clarity descending. Kane was exactly where she needed him. Cooper was unconscious. Reed secured in the barn. All the pieces were in position. "You know what the hardest part of that impossible shot was?" Laura asked, her voice now coming from directly in front of Kane. "Not the distance, not the wind. It was knowing that everyone thought it couldn't be done. That's what makes a perfect shot perfect, doing what they think is impossible." Lightning flashed one final time, illuminating Laura standing before Kane, her competition pistol aimed with unwavering precision. In that frozen instant, he saw in her eyes the same focus that had made her a legend in the shooting world. The storm's fury reached its peak outside, nature itself building to the coming climax. Laura Carter, the woman they'd thought was just another helpless hostage, had turned their home invasion into her own private shooting competition. And she never missed. Kane's laugh cut through the storm's fury. Perfect position, perfect shot, just like Richardson. His gun didn't waver, But there's something you don't know. You're not just escaped convicts, Laura replied calmly. 3 men with your skills don't end up in the same prison block by accident. Very good. Kane's professional demeanor shifted subtly. The escape wasn't random. We had help, resources. This farm wasn't a coincidence either. Lightning illuminated the trophy wall. You came looking for me, the woman who made the impossible shot, the one they called Deadeye. We need your skills. Kane's voice hardened. The prison break was just step 1. Our employer has bigger plans. Laura's mind raced. The precision of their initial approach, the way they'd tested her responses. Even Cooper's apparent nervousness could have been an act. Who? She demanded. Someone who's been watching you for years, waiting, planning. Kane smiled coldly. Did you really think you could just walk away from being the best? Talent like yours doesn't get to retire. Thunder crashed as pieces clicked into place. The Richardson competition, the shot nobody thought possible. That's when they noticed me. 5 targets. 5 seconds. Perfect accuracy at a range that shouldn't have been possible. Kane's respect was genuine. Do you know how many agencies analyzed that footage? How many organizations started tracking you after that? Laura's finger tightened imperceptibly on her trigger. I walked away for a reason. And now you're walking back in, one way or another. Kane's confidence was absolute. This farm is surrounded, has been since we arrived. Professional teams waiting for my signal. Your little hunt tonight, it just improved. You haven't lost your edge. As if confirming his words, a red laser dot appeared on the wall beside her. Then another, and another. Those aren't police out there, Kane said quietly. Check your husband if you don't believe me. Laura risked a glance at Tom. He was sitting unnaturally still, multiple red dots clustered on his chest. So, Kane lowered his weapon slowly. Should we discuss terms? Or do you want to see how many of them you can take out before they kill your husband? The storm raged outside, but inside the farmhouse, everything had gone deadly quiet. Laura Carter, the legend they called Deadeye, faced a choice she'd never trained for. Sometimes the perfect shot isn't the one you take. The red dots danced across Tom's chest as Laura processed this new reality. But something wasn't right. The angle of the lasers, the pattern of deployment. Impressive setup, she said calmly. Except for one thing. Kane's expression flickered. And what's that? Those laser sights are coming from ground level. No professional team would take such poor positions in this terrain, not with the barn offering high ground. Laura's shot was instantaneous, not at Kane, but at the window behind him. Glass shattered, and rain whipped into the room. In the chaos, 3 distinct thuds sounded outside. Laura's bullet had hit a concealed LED projector, destroying the false laser sight display. Kane's composure cracked. How? Basic tactical analysis. Real snipers would have taken elevated positions. Your team was just a trick. Laura's aim remained steady. Nice try, though. Using my own reputation against me. You don't understand what you're turning down, Kane snarled, desperation replacing his professional mask. The people I work for don't exist, Laura finished. This whole thing, the prison break, the fake hostage situation, the theatrical recruitment pitch, it's just you trying to score a big payday by delivering a valuable asset. Thunder crashed as Kane realized his elaborate deception had failed. His hand twitched toward his weapon. Don't, Laura warned. I've made much harder shots than this. They said you were good, Kane admitted, real fear finally showing in his eyes. But they didn't say you were this good. That's why I walked away. Because being the best means everyone wants to own you, control you, use you. Laura's voice carried absolute certainty. I chose this life, this farm, and I'll defend that choice. The storm reached its peak outside, wind howling through the broken window. But inside, Perfect stillness descended as predator and prey faced each other in the darkness. This time, there would be no more pretense, no more games. Just the pure, lethal skill that had made Laura Carter a legend. Kane moved first, diving for cover as he triggered a flash grenade, military grade, proving his desperation. But Laura had anticipated this, closing her eyes a split second before detonation. The blast illuminated the room like artificial lightning. Through the after-image and ringing ears, Laura tracked Kane's movement by sound and memory. 3 steps to the doorway. Pause. The scrape of his boot on hardwood gave away his direction, heading for the kitchen, where Cooper still lay unconscious. "Reed's already free," Kane called out, trying to disorient her with sound. "Had a backup plan for that." "No," Laura replied calmly. "He isn't." She shifted position, keeping Tom covered. Checked his restraints 3 times. Old competition habit. "Always verify your work." A burst of gunfire shattered the kitchen window, glass tinkling onto tile. Kane was trying to create an escape route. Laura smiled in the darkness. He was running out of options, making mistakes. "You're trapped in here with us," Kane growled, frustration evident in his voice. "Wrong again." Laura's shot was precise, hitting the kitchen light fixture. Sparks showered down, forcing Kane away from his planned exit. "You're trapped in here with me." Tom moved silently into position, reading her tactics without need for signals. Years of marriage had taught him to anticipate her strategies. He kicked over the coffee table, creating both noise and cover. Kane took the bait, firing at the sound. Empty brass clinked on the floor. His magazine was running low. Each shot revealed more about his position, his state of mind, his growing desperation. "Your employers," Laura called out, moving to flank his position. "They didn't just want a shooter, did they? They wanted someone who could train others, create more like me." "You could have been part of something bigger." Kane's voice carried real bitterness now. "Instead of wasting your talent on this farm." Laura's laugh was cold. "That's what none of you ever understood. I didn't waste anything. I chose this life, this place." Her voice hardened. "And I'll defend it." Outside, the storm began to ease, as if nature itself was stepping back to watch the final confrontation. Through the broken windows, pre-dawn light began to creep in, revealing the battlefield this farmhouse had become. Kane had one chance left, and they both knew it. The next move would determine everything. Dawn's first light revealed the full extent of the night's destruction. Broken windows, bullet holes in walls, shell casings scattered across hardwood floors. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie stillness, broken only by the drip of rainwater and the creak of settling wood. Laura moved like a ghost through her home's familiar shadows. 10 years of peaceful mornings had taught her every angle, every line of sight. Now she used that knowledge with lethal precision. Kane had fallen silent, a dangerous sign. His earlier desperation had crystallized into cold purpose. He'd expended his advantages one by one. The fake sniper team, the flash grenade, Cooper's unconscious form as potential leverage. All that remained was the raw skill that had made him a military marksman. One shot. His voice carried clearly through the pre-dawn. "Quiet. That's all it would take to end this. You know I'm good enough, but not better." Laura tracked his position by sound. "You're military trained, effective, efficient." She moved silently into position. "I'm something else entirely." The first rays of sunlight pierced through broken windows, creating sharp angles of light and shadow. Laura had positioned herself perfectly, using the dawn just as she'd used the storm, another environmental factor to control. Kane realized too late what she'd done. The rising sun silhouetted him against the kitchen wall while leaving her in shadow. A basic mistake no professional should have made, but Laura had maneuvered him there so gradually, so precisely, that he'd never noticed the trap closing. "The Richardson shot," he said quietly, understanding finally dawning. It wasn't just about accuracy, it was about control, manipulation, creating the perfect conditions. Every competition is about reading your opponent, Laura confirmed. Understanding their weaknesses, their breaking points. She stepped into view, weapon trained with competition-grade steadiness. You lost this match the moment you threatened my home. The farmhouse creaked, settling after the storm's fury. In the growing light, two of the most dangerous shooters in the world faced each other across a battlefield disguised as a living room. The final round was about to begin. Make your choice, Laura said softly. But remember, I never miss. Kane moved like lightning, combat training taking over. His first shot shattered the window behind Laura as she rolled, her return fire precise and methodical, not trying to kill, not yet. Each shot calculated to reduce his options, close off, escape routes. Heard him exactly where she wanted him. The morning sun painted golden lines across the battlefield their living room had become. Laura used every angle, every shadow. Her competition experience translated perfectly to this deadly game, reading opponents' patterns, anticipating movements, controlling the space. 3 rounds left, Laura called out, hearing the telltale lightness in Kane's magazine. I've been counting military standard loadout minus what you've expended. Her shot clipped his cover position, sending splinters flying. I've got a full magazine. Do the math. Kane's response was a burst of fire that would have been lethal if Laura hadn't already moved. She'd read his intention in the subtle shift of his weight, the direction his shoulders turned. The same skills that had let her predict wind patterns now let her anticipate human behavior. That's 1, she said calmly. 2 left. A shadow moved. Cooper, finally regaining consciousness. Laura adjusted instantly, keeping both threats covered. Kane tried to use the distraction, but her shot forced him back into cover. Stay down, Kane ordered Cooper. She's not what we thought. Not just a champion shooter, she's something else entirely. I'm exactly what you thought, Laura corrected, moving to higher ground on the stairs. The best competitive shooter in history. You just didn't understand what that meant. Cooper tried to reach for his fallen weapon. Laura's shot sparked off the floor an inch from his hand. Perfect distance to warn without wounding. That wasn't a miss, she advised. Next one won't be either. Kane used the exchange to change position, but Laura had anticipated this too. Her next shot caught the edge of his jacket, pinning it to the wall. He had to abandon it or be trapped, losing his spare magazine in the process. 1 round left, Laura announced. Make it count. The morning light streamed through broken windows, dust motes dancing in golden beams. In this illumination, Laura Carter was transformed. No longer the quiet farmer's wife, she was Deadeye again, the legend who had made impossible shots look easy. Kane recognized his situation. 1 bullet, 1 chance, against someone who had turned shooting into an art form. The Richardson competition, he said, real respect in his voice. I always wondered how you made those shots. Now I know, it wasn't just skill. It was total mastery of yourself, your environment, your opponent. Last chance to surrender, Laura offered. I meant what I said about professional courtesy. Kane's laugh was bitter. We both know that's not happening. His grip tightened on his weapon. 1 perfect shot, that's all it takes. True, Laura agreed, her aim unwavering. Question is, which of us is going to make it? The farmhouse held its breath. 2 of the finest shooters in the world, 1 bullet between them, and a lifetime of training coming down to a single moment. The shot, when it came, was perfect. Kane's final bullet passed through the space Laura had occupied a split second before. Her response was a single shot, surgical in its precision. Kane's weapon clattered to the floor, his hand disabled but not destroyed. Professional courtesy even at the end. Impossible, he gasped, cradling his injured hand. Nobody's that fast. Not impossible, Laura corrected, keeping him covered as she retrieved his fallen weapon. Just perfect execution, like Richardson. Cooper made a desperate lunge for a discarded flash grenade, but Tom was faster. Laura's husband had waited patiently for his moment, and now he took Cooper down with practiced efficiency. Years of watching Laura train hadn't been wasted. Called the police when the power first went out, Tom announced, securing Cooper with zip ties. Should be here soon. Storm slowed them down. Laura nodded, her competition pistol never wavering from Kane. Your recruitment pitch needs work, she told him. Home invasion's not the best way to make friends. They'll send others, Kane warned, his professional mask finally cracking. People who want your skills, your knowledge. Let them come. Laura's voice was steel wrapped in silk. They'll find the same thing you did. I chose this life, this place. Her aim remained competition perfect. And I'll keep choosing it. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The morning sun streamed through, broken windows, illuminating the aftermath of the night's battle. Brass casings glinted on hardwood floors, bullet holes marked walls, and in the center of it all stood Laura Carter, not just a legend, but something more dangerous. A champion who had never lost her edge. A farmer's wife who had never forgotten her skills, a defender who had turned her home into a shooting gallery for those foolish enough to threaten it. Kane looked at her with a mixture of fear and awe. What they said about you, it wasn't enough. Wasn't even close. No, Laura agreed, as red and blue lights began to flash outside. It never is. Sheriff Matthews surveyed the farmhouse as dawn painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. 3 ambulances, 6 patrol cars, and a dozen deputies documented the aftermath of what would become local legend. So they just picked the wrong house? He asked Laura, who sat calmly on her porch steps, Tom beside her. Something like that. She watched as paramedics loaded the thoroughly subdued Kane into an ambulance. Cooper was already en route to the hospital, and Reed had been extracted. From the barn, still securely zip-tied. And you, what, just got lucky? Laura shared a knowing look with Tom. Let's go with that. The sheriff shook his head, reviewing his notes. 3 escaped convicts, all ex-military or special forces, and they just happened to try taking hostages. At the home of a simple farmer's wife, Laura finished firmly. Her competition pistol had been carefully returned to its hiding place before the police arrived. Some legends were better left undisturbed. As the law enforcement circus wound down, Carol Rodriguez pulled up in her truck, bringing coffee and fresh pastries from town. "Heard what happened on the scanner," she said, hugging Laura, "though I suspect we didn't hear everything." Laura accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. The morning was crisp and clean after the storm, like the world had been washed new. Already, Tom was boarding up broken windows, his movements careful around his bandaged head. "You know what this means," he said quietly when they were alone. "Others might come." "Let them," Laura replied, surveying her farm, damaged but undefeated. "They'll find the same thing these 3 did. Some things are worth protecting, worth fighting for." She didn't need to say more. Tom understood just as he had when she'd first walked away from competition, glory, seeking peace. What they'd built here, this life, this home, was more valuable than any trophy. "Besides," she added with a small smile, "I might be getting a little rusty. Could use the practice." The morning sun rose higher, drying the storm's remnants as Laura Carter stood on her porch. Not just a farmer's wife. Not just a legendary shooter, but something far more dangerous. A champion who had found something worth defending. The next time someone threatened her home, they'd learn the same lesson as Kane and his crew. Some legends never lose their edge. They just find better reasons to use it.